Deep Sea Embers Chapter 41 to 50. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 41. Inches inside the antique shop. The interior of the antique shop was just as Duncan had guessed. It was chaotic, decadent, and business bleak. Purely going by how much dust had piled up near the window, it wouldn't take much for one to imagine how bad life must have taken the owner. He first saw the table near the walls that are placed with large vases, sculptures, and totem-like things of unknown meaning. Meanwhile, the wall behind the storage table was decorated with a shelf, which had been used to place relatively small goods in the store. There's also a long bar counter directly opposite the front door where the owner would receive guests. However, instead of the shelf behind the counter being filled with products, it's only adorned with some dusty picture frames and small ornaments, likely sentimental items by the owner. There's also a staircase leading up to the second floor right of the counter, which was groggy and difficult to make out due to the darkness. But Duncan did have some recollection of this area because there's also an out-of-sight door below the staircase. It leads to the warehouse in the back of the shop, which was mostly filled with clutters and stuff. Truly, it was hard to imagine how someone could make a living in this decrepit shop and even have money to offer the sun god religion. Duncan walked toward the counter to further examine the area. As he moved his foot carefully, the wooden creaking of the floor eventually caused him to pause, and that's when he noticed the lamp fixed to the wall. It was an electric light bulb. Duncan's brow immediately frowned at the recognition. NOVELBJN.C ohm. The style of the lamp was unfamiliar with that wrought iron frame and grayish lampshade design, but in any case, the structure of the tungsten light bulb inside was immediately recognizable at a glance. Electricity is already this prevalent in the world that civilians in the lower sector of town can also afford it. Then why the gap in oil lamps in the underground sewers? They even used torches in some parts. Huge questions arose from the conflicting information, especially about the arrangements in the underground sewers. He had assumed those gas and oil lamps were due to the world's technological limitations, but that's clearly not the case. Instead, it was deliberate by the management of the city. Diving deep into his fragmented memory, Duncan tried to seek out the corresponding knowledge in his head. Sadly, the only answer he got was that, it's common sense, and, urban planning is so. Either this knowledge was not made public, hence the reason why his body here didn't know anything. Or, the knowledge was so basic that it left no impression on the cultist's mind. With momentary confusion in his heart, Duncan reached out and turned on the electric light. With the click of the switch, the bright light immediately illuminated the area near the staircase and counter. There's also a switch on the opposite wall that controls the lights in other storefront areas on the first floor, but Duncan wasn't going to move it for the time being. It's late at night, and a small light in an antique shop that has been closed could be explained as the owner getting up for a stroll, but lighting up the whole establishment would surely attract unnecessary attention. With the limited light near the staircase, Duncan's gaze first swept over the nearest goods and caught onto the wooden figure. It was less than half a meter high with a strange face pattern of red and blue paint. Then next to it were antique vases that looked like ceramic. These things looked shabby and old, but the outrageous price tag hinted at a different story. The original price was $420,000, and the discount was 36%. Duncan's gaze quickly shifted away and swept through the store. According to his assessment, he suspects there's not a single item that was genuine, and if there were, he would commit suicide by banging his head against the vanished. It couldn't be any more fake. In fact, Duncan was confident no normal human being would ever believe this shop sold any real antiques. If anything, the oldest relic in this entire shop would be that signboard outside the door based on how shabby it looked. But Duncan wasn't surprised such a store existed in these parts. If the owner knew he was selling fakes, then why not? And if the customers knew they were here to buy fakes, then even better, right? This was the lower sector of the city, the area where commoners lived. Who could afford real antiques anyways? So, the signboard hanging outside the shop was merely a formality. Only the informed would visit. Anyways, regardless of whatever crummy lifestyle this body had before death, Duncan only had one thing that concerned him right now. Could he use this place as a foothold to transverse between the vanished? He needed a safe location to transport supplies with eyes ability. If this shop could provide shelter from prying eyes, then that would be perfect. Duncan came behind the counter and sat down in a chair to comb through the memories in his possession. He's deliberating if the plan would work and the dangers that might entail. First, the original owner was a sun god believer, no doubt about that part, but only at the lowest level. He's a grunt, a nobody. And due to the city-state authorities cracking down on cult activities in recent years, it's become increasingly more challenging to take part in the events arranged by the organization. Even better, the middleman in charge of contacting him with the higher-ups were all dead from the previous spirit walk Duncan did, effectively destroying any connection between him and the other cultists. They wore masks during the gatherings so no one saw his face. Now, if he did have to consider a hidden danger that bothered him, Duncan would say it's the reason behind why the Sun cultists are sacrificing people everywhere they could. 4 years ago, the city-state of planned attacked the Sun cultists when they attempted to create a mass sacrifice at the city's heart, supposedly to resurrect their so-called sun god. It would have ruined the city if that did happen. Luckily, the authorities and the Church of the Deep Sea Storm vanquished the heretics before then. However, Duncan understood that the event was only a prelude to something much more terrible. He had no affection for Planned, but this city was too important to let it be destroyed by some fanatics. Chapter 42 Inches Book's knowledge. The curfew imposed by the city was not suitable for exploring, so Duncan stayed in the antique shop all night. The excitement of stepping on land drove him to explore the entire building tirelessly. There's no question the original owner of this body was a cultist, but he's also an ordinary person. He required communication with others, interaction with civilized society, and sustenance to survive. In short, he needed to interact with the rest of the city. Interaction meant clues, and clues meant Duncan could vaguely deduce what's needed to survive here in Planned. Like the general level of technology used by the citizens in their daily lives, that's something he needed to keep in mind. Eventually, through the memories he absorbed, Duncan found a small amount of cash in the hidden compartment behind the counter on the first floor. This included a handful of coins of varying denominations, which were common in most city-states since they were jointly certified and issued by the governing body of the government and the Chamber of Commerce of the Boundless Sea. These coins are called Sora, and there are over 200 of these, enough for a family of 3 to live for a month in the lower sector of town. It seems that even if the business is dismal, the original owner still managed to maintain his standard of living despite donating most of his wealth to the cult. At the very least, there's a stable stream of customers to support the revenue. After inspecting everything, from the rooms to the warehouse in the back, Duncan eventually returned to the master bedroom on the second floor. There's a picture frame here, and inside was a black and white photo of a family of 3. It's a young couple in plain clothes and a little girl around 4 to 5 years old, and they're smiling at the camera with an artificial background behind them. Duncan came before the thing and picked it up. Through careful examination, vague clues soon surfaced from his memory. The original owner of this body is not in the photo. Does this mean they're close relatives of this body? They must be very dear to him. As he gazed at the young couple some more, Duncan seemed to feel a faint sense of longing emerging from the depths of his memory. Ads by PubFuture. However, the rest of the information about these people was a blur to him. It appears everything else regarding this family had faded away following the original owner's death. Putting the black and white picture down, he pondered what an item like this would cost for a commoner until his eyes fell onto the neatly made bed. That's when uncertainty flooded into his heart. Would a cultist, who has completely fallen into the belief of the sun, have time to tidy up and clean on the weekend? The storefronts on the first floor have obviously been neglected, so how can the beds up here be so clean and meticulous? Coming out again, he went over to the smaller room across the stairs. Here, the bed and desk were equally as clean. Sorting through the memories some more, Duncan's sure the original owner of this body had never returned during the past few days. In other words, someone else had come here during that period. Someone else lives here, a loved one. Duncan frowned slightly, and as he searched for clues, he eventually came to the desk and checked the items. There are pens and papers here, but also a book with beautiful floral letters written as its title, The Art of Steam and Gear, General Textbook 3. This made Duncan frown because it's no longer a suspicion that someone else also lived here. Then, out of curiosity, he picked up the textbook and flipped it open. Immediately, he was greeted by an illustrated inner page detailing the art of engineering and steam mechanics. The book owner also left many notes on the pages as reminders, a must for any academic student. Also, since the letters are so slender and beautiful, Duncan could assume it's from a young maiden because he sure as hell wouldn't write this neatly despite being a teacher himself. This discovery was causing his forehead to throb from overthinking. Still, as he dived deeper into the cold and lonely colors of those fragmented memories, Duncan eventually came upon a glimpse of what he wanted. It's a girl with dark brown hair standing in a warm, colorful background, someone whom Ron supposedly cared a lot about in this world. Duncan quickly shook off the discomfort and continued reading. He didn't care about the technical details written and instead looked for the editor's introduction and conceptual discussion regarding each chapter. Ads by PubFuture. Eventually, he caught a line that he's been looking for. Flames, or more strictly, flames released by burning oils and mineral crystals from the deep sea, are the cornerstones that supported and protected our society and civilization. The prosperity and order of modern civilization is based on fire and steam. Clean and convenient electricity cannot replace the exorcism effect of fire, nor can it make large machines run stably for a long period of time. Experiments have shown that steam is the most stable form of power when affected by deep space. In this section, we will discuss 3 typical architectures of the steam core and explain the mechanical principles and design ideas in them. Duncan's eyes slightly froze as he recalled the various forms of lighting in the sewers and streets. So is this the reason behind the weird situation? It's so they can resist or fend off whatever danger is lurking in the darkness. Duncan's heart flooded with inexplicable emotions as he continued to read the complex drawings and notes left behind by the owner's handwriting. It was a machine he couldn't understand at all, and it was definitely not the steam engine he knew in his previous life. The delicate gears, the extremely complex cylinders, and the pipes and valves between the various components are far beyond the concept of the steam engine, which was more like some kind of equipment that jumped out of a fantasy book. It's both contradictory and grotesquely beautiful. This is the heart that supports the progress of the world's civilization today. During his contemplation, Duncan slowly placed the book back in its original position, NOVEL-B in .C ohm. As an earthling, even if he had been a teacher, he couldn't understand what the steam-powered mechanisms in this book were. It's been developed to the extreme, centuries ahead of whatever the Earth had concocted. But even so, a vague enlightenment emerged in his heart. The development of civilization in this world seems to have taken a very different route than what he had perceived. In order to survive in a world surrounded by crises, the mortal kingdom has also taken on a bizarre posture. But no matter how strange the world was, as long as it could still be called civilization, it would have its own developmental structure and logic. The gas lamps that burn in the sewers, the electric lights that are lit in the shops, the steam organs depicted in books and condensed by the wisdom of an unknown number of people all vaguely revealed a kind of sturdiness. Chapter 43 Inches. Good morning, Mr. Duncan. After placing the book back in its place, Duncan examined the other furnishings in this room. Aside from the 2 notebooks in the desk drawer, there's nothing else of value, a sign that the small bedroom must have been used infrequently. Then through the content of the notebooks, which were full of subjects about steam mechanisms and engineering principles, plus the occasional complaints of teachers and classmates, it's easy to judge the owner was a young maiden that still attended school. Duncan eventually returned to the master bedroom after restoring everything in the other room to its original state. He needed more time to comb through his memories, which he did by sitting at the edge of the bed. After a while, he got up again and went to the cabinet nearby. By following the reflexes in his muscles to open the cabinet door in one of the drawers, he fiddled around and found what he wanted. Several bottles of spirits quietly hidden in the depths of the drawers, plus half a box of analgesic and nerve-relieving tablets, which were left behind by the cultist named Ron in the world. The previous guy had a serious illness that had worsened to the point of no return, so poor quality spirits and painkillers were the only things that could ease the pain at that time. However, pain remedies obviously did not help to prolong a sick patient's life. So, the man, who had lost all hope in his life, turned to the sun sect after the preacher told him about how the healing power of the sun god could solve all ills of the world, including one's ailing body. That's how Ron converted to becoming a cultist. And to a certain extent, the cultists did keep their promise. By performing a gruesome and strange ritual, the cultists were able to transfer the vitality of the innocent into another body of its believers. Duncan did not know the principle behind such a ritual, nor did he know if it really cured the incurable disease. Still, according to the remnants of the fragmented memory, the cultist named Ron did get better after the ceremony. It's the main reason the original owner of this body donated a large part of his family wealth to the cause. He got a taste of the forbidden fruit. But Duncan didn't care about what had happened between the dead cultists. Reaching deeper into the drawer, he smoothly groped around into the dark compartment and soon found a revolver and a box of bullets in good condition. The city-state of plan does not forbid citizens to bear guns, requiring only legal formalities to purchase and carry. However, a dealer of fraudulent antiques in the lower sector of town obviously lacked the funds and credibility to obtain a gun permit. Therefore, it's almost certain this weapon was obtained illegally. But no matter, legal or not legal, this gun now belonged to Captain Duncan. Exactly then, a slight noise suddenly caught his attention. It was the sound of a key rubbing against the door on the first floor. "You have a new message," I untimely chirps this while Duncan peered out the window to investigate. Quiet, he hushes the bird while holding the gun close to himself in readiness. "You stay here in the room and wait for my order. Also, keep your beak closed while outsiders are present." I immediately flapped her wings and flew to a nearby cabinet. "Aye, Captain." Duncan hurried out of the room, and just as he was reaching the top of the stairs, he heard the rapid footsteps coming upwards, followed by a young and urgent girl's voice from below. "Uncle Duncan. Are you back?" In the next second, a girl with long dark brown hair in a long brown dress and white shirt came into Duncan's sight. The maiden looked to be only 17 or 18 years old, thin and small, her hair seemingly stained with a little morning dew. The girl's appearance was not too prominent, but she had the youthful beauty that this age should have while showing a surprised face after meeting Duncan at the stairwell. He did not respond, only standing there silently on the second floor and hiding behind the faint light shining through the narrow window gap. Eventually, he finally spoke using an uncertain voice. "What did you just call me?" "Uncle Duncan." There was a moment of surprise on the girl's face, and then she tensed up by grabbing the handrail. The young girl was trying to see the face her uncle was making but couldn't due to the darkness. "Is there something wrong? Did you drink again? You haven't been home in days, and when I saw the light outside." Duncan soaked in the information like a sponge there. According to his memories, this girl should be his niece, and his only living relative, according to the original owner's memories anyway. What went wrong? Why would this girl, theoretically could not have known my secret, call out name, Duncan, so naturally? November LBJNN. "Nina," he said after this name stormed out of his tongue, "were you staying at school yesterday?" "I've been living in the school all these days," replied the girl under the stairs. "I thought you would be out for at least a week like before. So, I packed up my things and went to Burrow with my classmates." Mrs. White, who managed the dormitory, agreed to my request. "I only came home today because I noticed I left a book behind." "Are you okay, Uncle? I feel like you're acting weird today." "I'm fine, just a little groggy from sleeping," Duncan naturally responded and then strode down the stair to the first floor. A ridiculous theory was brewing in his mind, and now he needed to confirm it. He and Nina crossed paths, allowing both to make eye contact. However, it wasn't until Duncan was at the bottom of the staircase did the girl call out, "Uncle Duncan, are you going out later? Will you stay home for a few more days?" "Depends on the situation." Duncan kept his back to her due to being uncertain what would happen. "I'm just going to check on the front door. If nothing happens, I'll be staying home for a few days." "Ah, okay, then I'll go buy groceries. There aren't many ingredients at home," the girl said quickly and briskly ran upstairs with the youthful air befitting that age. Duncan had already come up to the shop's entrance then. Inhaling a soft breath, he pushed open the door and looked up at the signboard overhead. It's still the old and dirty thing, but the words have changed like it's always been like this, Duncan's Antique Shop. Duncan frowned and slowly came to the nearby dirty glass window to peer at the reflection. It was indeed a strange face, not of the majestic and gloomy ghost captain, but of a tired-looking middle-aged man with a beard and deep eye sockets. This was Ron's face, the cultist who had already been swallowed up by death in the sewers. Eventually, the noise of the city life had cut him off from the inspection. It's livening up around him. First, the crisp sound of door bells ringing by doors opening around the streets were rampant, followed by the bicycle chimes and passers-by talking on the streets. "Good morning, Mr. Duncan. Have you read today's newspaper? The deep-sea church seems to have destroyed a big cult den." Eventually, someone passing by the front of the antique shop even greeted him. Chapter 44 Inches Ordinary People's Breakfast. A newspaper printout was worth 12 pesos. the equivalent of a shabby breakfast or one of the cheapest desserts in the city square. Using this knowledge, Duncan carried a few coins in his arms and bought a local newspaper at the newsstand. The owner was a middle-aged man currently immersed in reading, and he waved his hand to signal the newspaper as a self-service without looking up. This roused Duncan to probe at what the other party was looking at. It was an analysis article of the previous lottery. Another one of those wishful players who had unrealistic fantasies of a colorful life. Then he glanced down at the newspaper he had just bought. The paper's front page had a title he was most interested in: a large number of believers got captured while a number of citizens were rescued. The photograph of the Inquisitor, printed on the side of the front page was, to Duncan's surprise, a fairly young woman with a striking scar on her left eye. Still, the beautiful contour couldn't be ignored among her subordinates when her height was a notch above the average man. The Inquisitor wore a tight-fitting lightweight armored battle dress and a two-handed sword that seemed to have come out of the era of cold weapons. It's the look of a sassy female knight in the style of medieval paintings, but contradicting this image was the huge steam robotic machinery behind her subordinates. It's both intimating and wonderful with those cannons mounted to the side. Duncan couldn't stop staring at this picture. The news of the cult's rally site being wiped out was good news for him. Without the fear of exposing himself, he could watch the villains who performed the sacrifice of the living being arrested and brought to justice without psychological pressure on his part. On top of this, he's also gained some new information. Female inquisitors who specialize in dealing with cultists, heavily armed steam-armored robots, church-armed forces with both cold and hot weapons. The information that's extremely difficult to obtain on the Vanished had been displayed here for him to read after spending a measly 12 peso. As Duncan had thought, times had changed during the period where the Vanished was drifting aimlessly during the past century. Even if not from the superficial point of view of who is better than whom, the mortal civilized society represented by the city-state of Planned has developed into a kind of golden era. Ads by PubFuture. But the intersection of the street was no place to read the newspaper. Casually rolling up the prize in his arm, he hadn't forgotten there was still a niece by the name of Nina waiting for him at the antique shop. Compared with wandering the city aimlessly by himself, a local born with a trust bonus was obviously a better source of intelligence. As for the Vanished, Duncan didn't worry. Even in the state of spirit walking, he could still clearly perceive the situation on the ship, perceive the state of his other body, perceive how the goat had steering the vessel at the helm, and how Alice was behaving herself in her room. Besides, the original crew code of conduct had the express rule of not to bother the captain while he's in her private personal room. It shouldn't be an issue if he goes missing for a few days due to spirit walking, right? And as the duration continued, Duncan quickly noticed his control over this special, mental projection, becoming more and more proficient. Perhaps, sooner or later, he could even actively control both bodies at the same time without worry. A sweet smell suddenly drifted from the side and caught him by the nose. Stopping to look, he found himself staring at the newly opened pastry shop across the street. This was the lower side of the city where the poor lived, so there were no high-end dessert shops. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean there aren't sweets suitable for those at the bottom of society. As it so happens, Duncan still had a few coins in his pocket to spend, which added up to 20 pesos, more than enough to buy a piece of cake. After a little hesitation, he went to the cake shop and paid for a piece of the most ordinary bee honey cake. The packaging material the store used was some kind of thick paper of poor texture, which was rough to the touch. Unexpectedly, Duncan's mood was surprisingly happy today as she headed back to the antique shop. Walking the streets, talking to people, buying things, and returning to your accommodation. Such a simple thing finally gave him a sense of being alive again in another world. It's ordinary and simple, yet a daily routine he's been deprived of in recent days. Life on the Vanished was actually okay. The goat head could get annoying at times, and Alice was a fun individual to have around. But this experience on land side was different, a totally refreshing experience. It didn't take long for Duncan to return to the antique shop, and before entering the store, he glanced upwards at the signboard again to confirm. A row of letters telling it's Duncan's antique shop remained. Ads by PubFuture. The door chimed as he pushed open the wooden slab of wood he called a door, signaling his entry and drawing a rush of steps from the stairs. The long brown-haired girl had a nervous and worried expression after breaking. "Uncle Duncan, where have you been?" she said quickly. "You said you were going to check the front door, but you were gone in a blink of an eye. I thought you had gone to the tavern or gambling house again." Question mark. Duncan was surprised by the other side's level of care. She's genuinely worried about him, the kind of dependence of a relative looking out for someone you loved from the bottom of their heart. Even if said person was a drunken gambler contaminated with the Sun cult's bloody deeds, it didn't matter here. I just went out for a walk and bought something on the way. As he spoke, he readily placed the cake and newspaper on the counter to show he was not lying, which seemingly put the girl at ease. Uncle, hold on a bit, I will bring breakfast down here. You didn't eat yet, right? I cooked corned beet soup. Before Duncan could speak, Nina's figure had disappeared up into the second floor until she returned with a large tray filled with a modest array of food for two. Duncan watched the girl smoothly arrange the table for him. He wanted to give a hand, but the level of diligence from Nina left no room for the guy to butt in. In the end, it left him with a bitter taste on his tongue because he knew what this indicated. A girl, the age of a high school student, must have been forced to adapt to an environment beyond her age due to the uncle's lack of care. Let's eat. Nina had everything ready at this point, and she glanced at Duncan as if she had said it countless times. Drive. Albert said that if you can eat breakfast regularly and keep a good mood, it will be better than spirits in the long run, better than painkillers too. Duncan did not add anything to that comment, only staring quietly at Nina, who showed a suppressed and strained face. It's pretty clear the girl wanted this breakfast to work out, which he gladly obliged by pushing the cake box over. This is, Nina widens her eyes in surprise and confusion. Cake bought from the newly opened shop around the corner, Duncan said casually, you're growing and should eat something more nutritious for breakfast. Nina showed a stunned face. Eventually, she started to murmur skeptically, Uncle, are you sure you're okay? Of course I'm all right, Duncan said with a relatively natural expression, I just remembered I haven't bought you a cake in a long time. Indeed, it's been more than a year, Nina muttered before bursting out into a giggle. Then, grabbing a kitchen knife, then we can both share half. Dr. Albert said you also need something nutritious. N-O-V-E, in .c ohm. Duncan felt strange about the interaction, but after a moment of silence, he nodded, okay. Chapter 45 Inches History. It's a wonderful feeling to be able to know what's happening from multiple angles, the vanished floating about in the open sea, the goathead's constant yapping and steering of the ship, and the cursed doll Alice strolling about on the vessel as she explored the various cabins. He was Captain Duncan, the master of the legendary Vanished, a moving, walking natural disaster of the sea. Yet, he's also currently sitting inside an antique shop sipping soup and having a peaceful breakfast with Nina, his so-called human niece. As if noticing the attention coming from the side, Nina, who was eating the cake, suddenly looked up curiously, Uncle Duncan, aren't you going to eat? Duncan glanced at the food on the other side's plate, is it enough? Yes, it's not good to eat too many sweets. Duncan nodded and took a bite out of his own slice. Immediately, his taste buds were attacked with the rich sweetness of honey and the mellow texture of the soft fluffy sponge in his mouth. But more than the flavor and texture, he's more surprised by the fact that his stomach was able to process the food. Clearly, unlike the first body Duncan possessed, this second one he's occupying had been revived with his interference. The soul of Ron may have died, but the flesh lives on. It's able to breathe, bleed, and eat like a normal human being. However, there was one thing the ghost captain wasn't quite sure about. He knew his body here must be ridden with a severe illness. That's the most prominent memory and emotion he gained from possessing this body. The spirits and painkillers in the drawers were a testament to this fact. Did my interference cure the illness? Or did the body heal itself after being revived by my arrival? Perhaps, the health of this body is still deteriorating and I'm only not aware of it due to my spirit walking ability. Duncan grew quiet while he mulled over this, and then he suddenly thought of something else. Don't you have school today? Nina lived in the lower sector of the city, where economic conditions were poor in this household. Nevertheless, education was a universal thing in the city-state of Plan thanks to the support of the church and city hall. As it so happens, her subject mostly had to do with steam engines and engineering, a study that was difficult and important for the church and factories. Due to this major, Nina's tuition had been partly paid for by her uncle, while the rest was done through scholarships from the city. Thankfully the girl didn't disappoint. According to her uncle's memory, she's always had excellent grades in all her classes. I don't have classes this morning, Nina nodded, only 2 history classes in the afternoon. In addition, I have to go talk to Mrs. White in the afternoon that I'm not staying in the dormitory during the next few days. Duncan suddenly stopped his gesture of scooping the soup and stared at Nina with a serious face. Don't you think staying here and taking care of someone like me will delay many things? If you stay at school, it might be more helpful to your studies. Nina was stunned by the concern in her Uncle Duncan's voice but promptly got angry instead. You shouldn't talk like that. You're just sick. You will get better if you follow the doctor's instructions and take the medicine. Mom and Dad entrusted you to me. It was your parents who entrusted you to me. Duncan corrected the girl right away and organized his language. You were only 6 back then. But now I'm 17. Nina puffed her face up and stabbed the fork into the last piece of cake on her plate. Your ability to care for yourself is inferior to me. If I did move out, it wouldn't take more than 3 days for you to turn this room into a mess. In fact, I can also help out with the store. At least I can clean up the dirty windows and floors. I can barely see through the glass anymore. N-O-V-E-J-N.C. Duncan listened helplessly to the girls, preaching, since he didn't expect his words would bring such a big reaction from the other party. But slowly, he couldn't help but laugh again. He felt a temperature in this girl named Nina, a warmth that's bathed in sunlight. All right, it's just a casual mention, he said and shook his head before stirring the soup bowl with the spoon. The afternoon is history class. How are your studies going in that class? Uncle Duncan, are you really all right? Nina's got wide in surprise. You've never been, well, at least in the past 2 years, I have never heard you asking about my studies. Duncan was about to explain when the girl cut him off by continuing, we are talking about ancient history recently, and Mr. Morris is telling us about the events after the Great Annihilation. To be honest, it's quite interesting. Ancient history sounds much like the stories you find in fictional books, far more enjoyable than modern history. Duncan contemplated what she meant and inquired further, sounds like you're studying well. I'll test you then. What is the concept of the Great Annihilation? Uncle Duncan is acting very strange today. Although I can't tell why, but different from his usual self. But Nina didn't think much of it. The simple girl was just glad that her uncle's mood was happier and not the usual depressed state. So, with a proud smile, she began to tell Duncan what she had learned. The Great Annihilation took place about 10,000 years ago. Although for unknown reasons, ethnic minorities with unique cultural traditions such as the elves, dwarves, and the orcs recorded inconsistent dates in their own calendars, but in general, archaeologists agreed that the Great Annihilation occurred at the end of the Age of Order 10,000 years ago. Duncan calmly listened but got a boatload of question marks in his mind. Elves, dwarves, orcs, what's going on here? So there is not only one intelligent race on land. And the elves, are they the same type of race like I know of? Is there also another city-state living in an industrial steam age? He couldn't help but come up with some very strange pictures in his mind until Nina's voice interrupted again. There are certain discrepancies in the accounts of the Great Annihilation in various city-states, but the common part is that the Order era before the Great Annihilation was a far more prosperous, stable, and secure era than it is today. Back then, there were extremely vast continents with an ocean less extensive than what it is today. There is also no reality border, like now between land and sea. The era after the Great Annihilation is called the Deep Sea Age, and the Deep Sea Age continues to this day with no signs of it ending. The most striking feature of the Deep Sea Age is that the vast sea covers almost the entire world, while less than 10% of the land is left from the old era. Currently, all of the city-states are on various islands, with ships crossing the ocean as the main mean of communication between each settlement. In the early days of the Deep Sea Age, the remnants of the old world suffered heavy losses with entire civilization nearly brought to the brink of destruction. Among the many powers that rose afterward, the ancient kingdom of Crete is the first and most notable within the historical texts. Its legacy lasted for merely a century before its collapse, but its influence on future generations could still be felt today. Like the primitive and crude classification of anomalies in the world, it's the very foundation for our refined system today. Chapter 46 Inches Anomalies and Visions. According to what Nina said, Duncan finally understood roughly what kind of earth-shattering changes had taken place in this world and realized that the original world was not as strange and dangerous as it was now. According to historical records, the world before the Great Annihilation was a prosperous and safe paradise. Back then, the ocean was yet the boundless sea of today, which now occupied 90% of the world's surface, nor were there all these dangerous anomalies and visions, running rampant in the world. Although the modern folks looked at their world as normal, to Duncan though, this normal was in fact the weird and twisted version. Unfortunately, he had no way of knowing the exact details of the Great Annihilation. Sure, the archaeological community has been making efforts in this regard to search for clues, but the discrepancy between the states and races was too different to give a proper conclusion. All they knew was that the current deep sea age, an era of water and malicious danger, had come out of the chaotic fog thereafter. Nina naturally didn't know there was a ghost captain drawing knowledge through words. Instead, she only thought that her uncle desired to test herself. This brought a lot of joy to the girls' day because they had not shared in these warm moments in a very, very long time, especially when her uncle would return to the irritable state the minute after the spirits and painkillers wore off. So, before her uncle Duncan fell ill again, she wanted to show off her progress, which might keep his good mood going for another day or two at least. November LBJNN. Mr. Morris is very interested in the history of the Kingdom of Crete, and he's one of the leading experts on this subject. He told us that although the ancient Kingdom of Crete lasted only 100 years, it was the first civilization after the advent of the Deep Sea Age to rise from the ruins to fight against anomalies and visions. Even now, their research continues to dictate our advancement in the world, especially the classification of anomalies and visions. There's a classification of anomalies and visions. Duncan raised his eyebrows, not forgetting to guide the girl on the path he wanted. He had been very concerned about this topic since the beginning of their conversation. Unlike his original assumption of all supernatural events being called anomalies, there's apparently another classification called visions, which was entirely different if he had to guess. Nina nodded, remembering what she had heard in class. Old Mr. Morris taught us that the easiest way to distinguish between anomalies and visions is the scale they exist as. Usually, the scale of anomalies is small, often limited to an object, animal, or even a person. Anomalies can also be artificially moved due to their limited range of influence, usually to only one person at a time. Knowing this fact, we can move the anomalies to another location for sealing or isolation. In rare cases, we would even exploit the more innocuous anomalies by using tools and such as a medium. The scale of visions is far greater than the anomalies, and the smallest vision is the size of a house, with the larger ones spanning the whole city. In rare cases, the size can become so big that it's hard to imagine. A considerable number of visions are incapable of being moved by man. They are either fixed in one place or operate according to their own will, and their ability to affect is far greater than that of anomalies. Usually, visions can affect so many targets within their effective range that they can almost be equated with the idea of natural phenomena, hence the term vision. Unlike anomalies, almost all visions cannot be sealed or controlled. They exist in the world like the natural order, operating undisturbed by outside forces. Since most visions are dangerous, the only thing one can do is to avoid these dangerous locations and not get tagged by their range. Fortunately, the most dangerous visions usually do not move, and the pioneers of the past have helped us identify these dangers so that we could safely keep our distance from them. Nina said very seriously, and then as if suddenly remembering something, she quickly added, "Ah yes, teacher also mentioned to us that these distinguishing methods and characteristics are only, usually effective, and not absolute. Anomalies and visions are unreasonable things, so no matter how people sum up their experiences, there will always be anomalies or visions that do not conform to the definition. On top of that, the two can sometimes interchange between the two categories. Like in the new city-state calendar for example, in 1830, the city-state of Renza had a runaway anomaly called fungal, forcing the local church officials to pay a great price to banish this uncontrolled anomaly to a nearby island, which in 1835 got identified as a vision. Then in the year 1844, the great Saint Palatine took his own life on the fungal island and used his own urn to remove this threat. Nowadays, this urn housing fungal is renamed Mushroom Urn of Palatine in honor of that great saint and his sacrifice. It's currently sealed underground in the Cathedral of City-State Lenza as a relic. Duncan listened intently to what Nina was telling, causing his mind to race wildly from ups and downs. In this short breakfast alone, he had gathered more information than he had spent so many days on the Vanished combined. Once again, he's proven that communication on land and setting up an outpost within the city was the most effective way of aggregating intelligence about this world. A civilization that has developed to the industrial stage must find ways to compress the basic knowledge of the functioning of society into its own education system. Otherwise, it would become difficult for the rest of society to follow. As a result, Nina could never fathom how much of a treasure trove of knowledge she truly held in her hands. For that, Duncan appreciated her kindness and innocence. So, Mr. Morris told us at the end of the last lesson that in dealing with abnormalities and visions, there is only one true and eternally valid rule. That is, no matter how many laws we summarize, there will be anomalies or visions that do not conform to the law in the world. This rule, also known by scholars as eternal zero, is by default at the top of all books and papers in the field. Chapter 47. Inches before the statue, Nina got up and began clearing the dishes once breakfast was over. Based on her hand movements, it's obvious she's been doing these chores for a long time. No doubt the cleaned and maintained bedrooms are also her work. Duncan had every reason not to help. As an uncle who's been seriously ill, decadent, and dedicated most of his energy to a cult's corrupted cause, he would never bother with such things. But he's not that person. So with the urge to help, he picked up the large tray from Nina's hand. "I'll help you carry this. It's bothersome seeing you run upstairs like this." This roused a stunned look from Nina's face. She wanted to say something but stopped after the man began to leave her behind. Hurrying to catch up, "Uncle, be careful, the doctor said your current condition is not stable." "Doctors, Dr. Albert." Duncan kept his back to her while walking upstairs. According to the corresponding impression in the memory fragments, that's the name of the physician in charge of his illness. "It doesn't matter, we have no clue as to what my illness anyways. The most he can do is prescribe painkillers for me." "Then you should also listen to the doctor's advice." Nina followed Duncan up to the second floor and protested all the way to the kitchen. "He at least knows how to keep one healthy." Halfway through Nina's speech, a flapping of wings suddenly interrupted her nagging and caused them both to swing their heads in the direction. They didn't see what exactly the thing was because it flew in such a blur, but they did catch the direction of where it went. "Uncle Duncan, something just went into your room," Nina exclaims, her body running out in pursuit. "It could be the neighbor's cat." Don't." Duncan only had time to say half a sentence when he saw Nina pushing open the door to reveal the white dove hiding in the master bedroom. "I was standing on top of the cupboard, one claw grabbing a French fry and stuffing it in her mouth when the door suddenly swung open." This created an awkward scene where two humans stared at an unexpected bird. "Ah, Gugu," I quickly corrected herself and flapped that wing to act all innocent. Duncan's eyes twitched somewhat after he noticed the opened window. This was clearly the work of this dove, which had a direct view of the pier across the rooftops. She actually went to the dock and came back with some French fries. "A dove?" Nina finally came back to her senses and exclaimed, "Uncle Duncan, you have a dove in your room." "I can see that," Duncan grimaced. "I don't know it." I immediately threw the fries aside and flew over, landing on Duncan's shoulder and shaking her head to rebuke the denial. "Fine, it flew in this morning," Duncan sighed. "It may be someone else's pet, but its brain isn't very clever, so now it's refusing to leave after I fed it." I listened and made a loud goo-goo noise. If it weren't for the presence of outsiders and Duncan had given the order before, she would have begun to shout, "Ah yes yes yes," at this time for sure. Nina did not doubt her uncle's statement in the slightest. Staring wide with light in those eyes, she leaned over carefully. Do you want to raise it?" "Can I raise it?" The girl's desire was written all over Tay's face. Without a doubt, I was a lovely bird with pristinely white feathers, so it was no surprise that Nina would be smitten by its charm. After a moment, he pretended to hesitate for a moment before nodding. "Yes, but only if the pigeon is willing to stay. It may fly away at some point, and you can't complain when the time comes." Nina smiled happily. "Great. I knew Uncle Duncan is a reasonable man." In the central prayer room of the Cathedral of the Storm, the city bishop Valentine, dressed in the black robe of a priest, stood solemnly in front of the statue of the storm goddess. He's a tall, thin man with sparse white hair and eyes as calm as the water. Right now, he's currently discussing an important topic with Inquisitor Vanna, who had come to seek his advice early in the morning. NOVELBJN.C. If what you saw in your dream is correct, then indeed, that is the vanished, Valentine says after hearing the full story. Although the status of bishop and inquisitor are on equal footing in terms of rank, but having the latter seek out advice from the former was a common practice since clerics are more knowledgeable in their studies. So it is the vanished. Despite having the answer in mind already, Vanna still couldn't help but heave a long sigh at the bishop's judgment. I thought. You thought it's just a legend, right? The type of ghost ship mentioned by the nervous sailors bragging about their ventures in the tavern. Valentine knew what Vanna was trying to say and promptly shut it down. The existence of the vanished is a fact recognized by all city-states and churches. It is not a legend, but something that can be found in the archives. I know the vanished did exist at one time and that we can even find the blueprints for the ship in the city archives. However, all those details related to that ship are limited to when it's still a vessel sailing in the real world. When that Captain Duncan is still a human. Vanna spoke in a serious tone, and then her expression became more cautious upon looking up at the statue behind the bishop. The point is that the ship was clearly recorded as to have crashed into subspace. A century ago, thousands of fugitives from the 13 islands of Weaselland witnessed the ship and their homeland being swallowed up by the collapse of the border and falling straight into the shadows. In the decades since, although eyewitness reports of seeing the vanished reappearing in the real world would pop up once in a while, but there is no real evidence, and a considerable number of scholars have doubts about the ship's return. Is it really possible that something swallowed up by subspace can reappear in the real world? To date, nothing but the vanished has ever returned to reality after falling into subspace. That is a fact. Even if it is the vanished, there are only after-the-fact sightings. That is also a fact. Scholars from all walks of life doubt the ship's return like you said, but that's not the key factor, the old man said, his eyes suddenly falling on Vanna with a certain seriousness on his face. The key is what is making so you afraid. Name 8 to 10 minutes. Chapter 48 Inches Awareness. In front of the statue of the storm goddess Gomona, the blessed candle burned serenely as the faint skylight shone through the tinted glass dome overhead, giving Bishop Valentine a divine halo around his figure when he said the last word. Vanna hissed sharply as the thunderous boom shattered from within over the senior's words. The goddess's blessing was finally taking effect and granting her power, which manifested itself in the sound of battering waves in the ear. The existence of the vanished is historically recorded, and the omen from your dream is an objective fact granted to you by the goddess. With all these guidance, you still doubt the existence of that ship when the first reaction should have been to seek a solution to the problem. This means your subconsciousness is actively avoiding the threat placed before your eye. Inquisitor Vanna, from the look of things, that ship is already swaying you with its powers. Vanna felt a fine layer of sweat on her forehead, but the drapery that had confused her all night had disappeared, giving her clarity that the bishop was right. When did I get affected by the vanished? When did it happen? This was exactly what many visions and anomalies with horrific tendencies possessed, making the contact cognitively confused until they've completely fallen into a state of denial. It's an intelligent creature's mean to protect themselves. By denying something, one could avoid being tainted further. As an inquisitor who often deals with supernatural powers, Vanna knows this knowledge very well, but she never thought that she would fall into this psychological trap, since she's known to have strong willpower. I don't know when I was affected, she said frankly. Adds by PubFuture. In the presence of her fellow devout bishops, Vanna did not shy away from the weakness she had exposed this time. It was perfectly normal to fall into a psychological abnormality due to anomalies or visions, and shame and concealment would only make the issue worse. I came here directly after waking up from the foreboding dream. I didn't talk to anyone, nor did I touch any books or relics. I cannot think of a point when I got corrupted. But you have just shown a deliberate avoidance of the omen you received in your dream, so, the corruption should have happened earlier than that. The bishop gazed intently at Vanna's face as if observing her changing eyes and breathing fluctuation would reveal the secret. Have you been exposed to anything abnormal lately? That could have been from the vanished, directly polluting your subconsciousness ahead of time. Recently, Vanna frowned and then suddenly recalled the sacrifice that had fallen at the scene of the Black Sun ritual. That time she encountered the flash of green flame shooting out of the corpse's eye and causing her to sever a finger as a consequence. Jerking to attention and showing a shocked face, the day before yesterday, I led a team to clean up the Black Sun sacrificial site in the sewers. Did you get my report about the nameless corruption I found at the scene? The bishop shook his head. No, you directly went back to your place after sending over the cultists. Vanna became startled at the truth. Did anyone else who participated in the operation that day report about this? Nothing. The church did not get any report about your finding. All the reports we had were about the Dark Sun heretics. Under the witness of the storm goddess's statue, the bishop and inquisitor both exchanged a nod at the realization. It seems that we have found the point at which the corruption first came ashore. The bishop exhaled softly, his expression still calm but grim. In the name of the goddess, do you swear that your memory of that night is still complete and clear? Vanna took a deep breath. In the name of Gomona, I swear that all I say and remember is the truth and nothing but the truth. The bishop nodded, then turned and lit the special incense set up in the rear. With a calm and divine voice, go ahead, Inquisitor Vanna, the goddess is now watching us. No corruption shall taint this room. Ads by PubFuture. In the following confession, Vanna revealed everything she remembered about what happened in the sewers that night. She spared no detail, and under the reinforcement of the special incense in the room, the memories were so vivid that it sounded like she's reliving that night in pristine clarity. She still remembers how the green flame flickered in that sunken eye socket when she pried it open, then of how the guardians and clerics all went quiet afterward despite performing the purification procedure on themselves. All of that was as she remembered, but what happened next was the freaky part that got covered up. Instead of their usual rowdy behavior of bringing the prisoners back to the church, everyone at the site had marched out of the sewers like they've been possessed. Puppets, that's how they were walking through the streets in the middle of the night. Vanna found herself numb to the bone looking back at things. If the other party wanted to kill everyone then, it would have been easy taking. The ghost flame infected your soul, so the physical purification you performed in the sewer is ineffective. That's how you all got deceived. What you all should have done is sprinkle holy oil on the ground and create a temporary holy ground to call upon the goddess's power with your prayers. That would have purified your spirit and cleansed the corruption. It's my fault, Vanna said in a heavy tone. I should have been more vigilant and alert. It's a mistake, but not a fault. The old man shook his head. You have great strength, but as an inquisitor, you're still lacking in experience. Fortunately, we have now cured you of that influence, which means the corruption on that corpse is not too strong. It only managed to interfere you at a psychological level, so the source must have been cut off that night. At this point, Bishop Valentine paused as if weighing something. The guardians who were acting with you at that time will likely return to normal in a few days according to the feedback from the incense. What we need to worry about is what's to come, the future. N-O-V-E in .c ohm. The future, Vanna repeated the bishop's last words, her expression slowly becoming serious. Yes, in the future, this matter is not over yet. The picture of the omen from my dream warned of a storm coming. The event last night was merely a prelude to that. The Vanished has not been sighted for many years, and most people believe the ship is lost in subspace for good. But it appears that's not true. Captain Duncan's obsession with the real world isn't finished yet. Bishop Valentine recited his findings slowly while turning as he gazed up at the statue of the storm goddess. A century ago, the Vanished crashed into the depths of subspace. Although there is no clear evidence, many eyewitness reports mentioned that there was a major storm hovering in the nearby waters that caused it to fall. The storm, that's the authority of our Lord. Vanna frowned. You think that Captain Duncan is going to exact revenge on the goddess? It's hard to say. Even if the ghosts returning from subspace are out to seek revenge, but gods are gods, they live in the kingdom of heaven above our own. Never has there been a case of something climbing up to the higher realms beyond reality, only descending downwards. But if Captain Duncan is seeking revenge on our Lord's human emissaries, the danger this poses would be endless. Our church's influence may stretch to every part of the world because we represent the storm goddess, but if there's going to be a target, it would likely be here in Planned. We are the heart of our faith on land, and the holy cathedral of the storm is difficult to pinpoint. Chapter 49 Inches Double Trouble. The gods dwelled in a kingdom far from the real world, the dimension which people believed to be the cornerstone of the world. Unlike common sense, the cornerstone was located not at the bottom of the world but at the apex of all dimensions. The ancient kingdom of Crete describes the structure of the world as they were known in the surviving texts. The cornerstone of the world stood at the very top of what's known, guarded by eternal truth and order. As its denizen, gods are eternal for merely living there. From the kingdom of gods downwards, it was the reality where all mortal beings are born. Through the afterglow of the gods, mortals are able to survive in the relatively stable and rich real world that we know today. But below that would be the spirit world. It was the realm of ghosts and spirits that gradually deviates from the cognition of mortals. In the spiritual world, the blessings of the gods have been thinned, and the twisted and grotesque forces are able to prevail. Then further downwards, beyond the spiritual world that no higher god could touch, there lies the deep sea that was no longer suitable for the survival of any living creature, a domain dominated by strange forces, a realm that's the reflection of the void. However, there's still something at the bottom beyond the deep sea, the depth of subspace entrenched in the shadowy crevice of all things. In there, dwelled the extremely dangerous ancient gods from a time lost to memory. They're sinister and carry the malice of those lost forever in the void. According to the accounts of the ancient kingdom of Crete, the gods were the ones who set the criteria dictating all living things. However, such a rule doesn't mean it's omnipotent. As one further dive into the lower domains, the power of the higher gods will decline, and gradually, the foul existence in subspace will fight back and vie for dominance. This was the setup of the current world: order and light at the top, darkness and chaos at the bottom. Two opposing forces using the mortal reality as their battleground. The knowledge was the ancient gift left to the world by the glorious civilization that pioneered the deep sea age 10,000 years ago. In the long years since, countless scholars have studied the hierarchical structure without finding any fault in the model. Nowadays, such a theory has universally become known as the world standard model. In this standard model, earthly mortals will fall into deeper places, but few people can return from the deep to the shallow. In rare cases of the lucky few that do return, none had ever shown the desire to subvert the heavens, which acted as the cornerstone of their world. It was precisely for this reason that the return of the vanished from subspace will become the world's most outrageous vision. Its return violates the world's understanding of the standard model. But on the other hand, the existence of the vanished was in line with the classic statement about anomalies and visions: nothing is ever permanent. In any case, neither Bishop Valentine nor Vanna thought that the ghost captain had the ability to take revenge on the storm goddess. Even if he had the heart, he wouldn't have the power. The reason for their belief: because the cornerstone and the real world are not continuously interconnected. At least so far, no scholar has found evidence that the cornerstone and the real world could be directly connected. Even the gods could only indirectly stretch their influence through projection, metaphor, and other methods. Meanwhile, a ghost ship, where would it find the means to strike at the higher realms? No-vel-b in .c ohm. Since it was impossible to seek revenge on the storm goddess herself, the only choice left was of course the goddess's followers in the earthly world. As the headquarters of the Church of the Deep Sea, the Cathedral of the Storm was an ark that sailed in seclusion on the boundless sea, coming and going without a trace. What's more, the Pope's crown sitting on the ark had the power to control the storm on behalf of the Lord, which was not a good target at all, lest the vanished wanted to be sunk by the waters. Now here comes the city-state of planned into the equation. This point was fixed at sea, an island with clear will to open up to the outside world. Such a fine target, with over 80% of its residences being devout followers of the storm goddess, who would pass it up? Vanna had decided that the ghost captain came for vengeance over its own demise. After all, the vanished had fallen into subspace in a storm 100 years earlier, and she couldn't think of any other reason why the ghost ship would suddenly return to reality without cause. All clues are pointing to this theory. But what exactly does that ghost captain intend to do? Vanna deeply furrows her forehead in thought. Bishop Valentine, do you think the vanished have anything to do with the recent movements of the Black Sun's followers in the city-state? After saying this, she paused before adding, in last night's dream, I saw the burning sun and the vanished appearing in plan together, and the simultaneous arrival of two disasters may be a sign given to me by the goddess. A reasonable speculation, but don't forget, the tainted sacrifice killed the priest of the Black Sun in the underground site, and that individual was a baptized emissary of the Black Sun. The bishop shook his head to rebuke the idea. At the very least, we can go by the evidence that the Black Sun's followers and the vanished are at odds against one another. Vanna went quiet as she contemplated her peer's insight. She couldn't object to that finding. In regards to the cultists we captured, I got some tip-offs from the city-state of Lenza this morning, the old bishop continues after getting no response. Vanna jerked up in surprise. A tip? The Sun heretics not only revived in plan, but they have also been active in the other city-states recently. We have credible reports that they've been transiting through the ports of Renza and Moko to gather somewhere. The old bishop now sounded worried. The officials there have managed to capture a few of them, and during the interrogation, the heretics are mentioning the sun's fragment. Sun fragment? You mean the supposed real body of their sun god after its disintegration? Vanna appeared shocked by the news. They think the peace fragment is hidden here in planned. It seems that this is the case. It is not known where the heretics got this information, or it may have been a revelation from their madness, but in short, they now firmly believe that part of their Lord's remains is hidden in our city. It's very likely they are intending to revive that dark god. Those lunatics. Vanna couldn't help but curse in a huff. How many lives have they mutilated in order to resurrect that dark and blasphemous sun? The black sun is how we address their god, but in their mind, that being represented the truest order. You can't expect the irrationals to have a conscience about blood on their hands. Valentine shook his head. They firmly believe in what they say is just, and there are only two methods of dealing with such people: subdue them or kill them. Vanna's mouth twitched at her peer's blunt answer. It looks like we are going to be busy in the coming days. The vast sea has never been peaceful, and the city-states are in the vast sea, Valentine recited. The captains have to face the storms in the oceans, and we have to confront the storms brought on by the fools of the world. Inquisitor, prepare yourself. The city-state of Planned is about to face its greatest challenge yet. Two challenges, Vanna corrected the bishop. In addition to the followers of the Black Sun, there is also a mysterious and terrifying ghost captain. If the Vanished and Black Sun really aren't working together, then our trouble has changed from 1 to 2. Bishop Valentine groaned slightly. Maybe there is another way. Going by the situation in the sewer, maybe the Vanished will fight with the believers of the Black Sun. Then it only means the troubles have merged into one earth-shattering trouble. Bishop Valentine. Vanna eyes the old man in front of her who had obviously begun to think differently. I can't think of a worse combination of bad news than that. Nothing good will come of two threats taking place at one time. Valentine sighed and admitted that Vanna was right. In short, have our clerics and watchmen work with the city police. We must arrest those Sun heretics who have infiltrated the city-state and eliminate this threat before the other comes. Vanna intends to remove one so they can focus all their attention on the ghost ship, effectively minimizing the danger posed by the two. As for the ghost ship, we don't know what it would do next, so we will leave it for the time being. Have everyone monitor the sea around the city though. I'd like to add some more ketchup. Duncan beckoned to Nina across the table. I can do it myself, so hand me the bottle. Nina immediately handed the ketchup over. Okay, Uncle Duncan. It's now noon, and Duncan and Nina are having lunch in the small kitchen on the second floor. The food in the antique shop was simple, a local salty pancake served with tomato sauce or hot sauce. They also had a serving of vegetable soup that was not exactly delicious. Nevertheless, both diners were happy enough about the moment since such a scene hadn't been common in their lives for quite some time. Duncan was truly starting to like this place a whole lot. Chapter 50 Inches Public Vision. After lunch, Duncan watched from behind as Nina cleaned up the table on her own. He wanted to help with the dishes. Sadly, he got promptly shut down by this niece under the ground that Uncle is not in good health and the doctor said to avoid cold water. In the end, this pirate captain could only lean near the stairwell and read the newspaper he bought this morning. This kind of a daily scene that ordinary folks took for granted, for some reason, gave him a strange sense of calm inside. But before he could act on it, Nina's voice had come again from the kitchen. Uncle Duncan, is there any news in the newspaper? Glancing down at the newspaper, the first of which was the date of August 14, 1900 in the New City State calendar, followed by the news that the church inquisitor had led a team to arrest dozens of cultists, this was probably the weightiest front page in the entire newspaper. It says that the inquisitor led her team to arrest dozens of Sun heretics, he said casually, and it mentioned that this was the largest heretical rally that the church had successfully cracked down upon in the past 4 years. The paper is also reminding the public to pay attention to night safety and to identify the heretical believers around themselves. Ah, I heard that on the way here too. Nina puts away the washed bowl into the cupboard and quickly scrambled to wipe the table. It's really scary. I've heard the teacher say those cultists who worship the sun will even sacrifice the living to their god. I can't believe there would be crazy people like that believing in such an evil cult. Duncan didn't know what to say for a moment. It didn't matter what he said, it would still feel weird. It's not like he could tell the niece that he had recently experienced the pleasure of being sacrificed and then counter-sacrificing the cultists. However, one thing's clear from Nina's reaction, she obviously did not know the fact that her uncle had become a Sun heretic. To the poor girl, her family had only behaved a little grumpier due to the illness and constant abuse of alcoholic painkillers. Maybe one day in the future, some cultist named Ron will really fall to the last step and drag his last living relative into the endless abyss, but at least until today, this has not happened yet, nor will it happen in the future. Uncle, why did you suddenly stop talking? Nina grew a little curious about the silence behind her and spoke with concern, uncomfortable again. No, I just got a little distracted. Duncan shook his head. What you said is true, the stuff they're doing is indeed mad. The newspaper also mentioned that the public should pay attention to safety and report those with suspicion in a timely manner. During this period, try not to go anywhere outside of school and home. Nina nodded, but then she let out an "ah," exclaiming sound like she just remembered something. But I already made an appointment with my classmates to visit the museum in 2 days. Museum? Duncan casually asked. What museum? It's the Oceanographic Museum near school at the edge of the upper sector, Nina explains, and I've heard that there's been recent exhibits of offshore mineral specimens. Is it okay? Go if you want. Duncan thought for a moment before nodding his head. Since there are patrols of church guards and city-state police everywhere, those cultists will not be bold enough to jump out in the next 2 days. Nina nodded happily. Are you going to school in the afternoon? Duncan asked again. November LBJNN. The afternoon is history and I don't want to miss Mr. Morris's class. Nina nodded. He's a very famous expert in the field of history, but it is strange though that an old gentleman as famous as him isn't lecturing at the university in the upper sector. Most students here in the public school don't like history to begin with. They're always asleep during his lectures. Duncan shook his head calmly. I can't answer you that. Don't joke around. Ignoring the part about Mr. Morris who teaches history, even Nina had only just come into his life, so where would he get that information? What's more, the memory fragment from the body definitely didn't have anything either. A sick ailing cultist wouldn't care about anything aside from keeping himself alive. Nina still had classes to attend in the afternoon, so she didn't stay in the antique shop for long after lunch. After hurriedly packing up her things, the girl merrily trotted out of home and made the trip for school on foot through the cobbled streets. From the antique shop to school takes about an hour of time. If she goes at her pace, the girl should make it without being late. Of course, there's the public transport in the city along the streets that everyone could ride, a streetcar powered by steam engine. Unfortunately, 6 pesos for a ticket was a price beyond the means of a lowly student without a job. The excuse Nina made to Duncan was that it's better to run since it's better for her health. However, Duncan knew that's not true and even thought about buying a bike for her. It's something he saw a lot of people ride during his outing to the newsstand. In a society that has developed steam machinery, the industrial product of the bicycle wasn't too expensive for ordinary folks to afford. Nevertheless, it's definitely not cheap for the residents of the lower sector where most of their wages goes into their daily expenses. Duncan didn't know where the identity he currently occupied would go in the future, but watching Nina trot all the way down the street corner, what's the word, a desire to be kinder to this girl. He didn't know why he had this desire, perhaps it's for the previous vegetable soup and salty pancakes, but it would pain him to see such a kind and diligent student lose her way in life. I should start thinking up a way to earn money in this city-state. With all sorts of thoughts swirling in his mind, Duncan put the newspaper in his hand down and slowly paced to the end of the second-floor corridor. Through the open window, he stared off into the city streets in a somewhat dazed state of contemplation. In this world, abnormalities and visions have long become a coexistence for civilization. Neither the church nor authorities have hidden this fact from the people's affairs. Take Nina for example. As a high school student, even she would have access to the information about the supernatural, and not the simple surface stuff either. Sure, the knowledge didn't involve everything, but it's not too far off either, like the list of anomalies and visions. Duncan lifted his head and stared silently at the sky at the thought of the list. Vision 001, Sun. The giant body of light moving in the sky that came into existence after the collapse of the ancient kingdom of Crete. The sphere of influence is infinite, stretching across the whole world while being unmanned in its operations. Humans can't touch it, nevertheless, it operates within the bounds of what is described as a vision. According to historical records, on the day of the collapse of the ancient kingdom, the sea raged as the city-states were shattered, and all the core members of the first dynasty died heroically in the darkness with their blood soaked into the sea. From then on came Vision 001 that rose from the ending of one dynasty to the next, but also the rising of a new era in a world of darkness. The ancient kingdom of Crete, the first city-state civilization established by survivors after the beginning of the Deep Sea Age, lasted only 100 years, but left also countless legacies behind as a blessing to their descendants. The word, Crete, meant eternal night, in the ancient language. It was a night that lasted for a century. All of this was written in Nina's history textbook.